What's up everyone, Joseph here. In this video, we're going to take a look at the grammar that is on page 37 of the book. These are the adverbs of frequency. This is on unit 6, page 37. We have seen this before on the intro book. We're gonna take a look at it once more. Adverbs of frequency. These adverbs describe how often something occurs. Describe the frequency of something occurring. So this is like quantifiers. It's like we know more or less the percentage of the thing happening, but we are not exactly sure. And that's when we use the adverbs of frequency, because we don't say things like I am 100% of the time late, or I am 90% of the time working on Saturdays. Like 50% of the time I eat breakfast. We don't say that. We use the adverbs of frequency. So in this chart we can see more or less, again, this is open for interpretation. We are not, for some people, almost always can be 80%. For some people, usually can be 20%. For other people, almost never can be 1% and no more. So, adverbs of frequency go before most verbs. These are verbs that are not the verb be. For example, I often work on Saturdays. Before, as you can see, it's before the verb. I often work on Saturdays. Alberto almost never uses his car. Again, before the verb. And this, where it's saying that I, like 60% of the time, work on Saturdays. It's like the frequency on when I work, in this case. Alberto almost never uses his car. This is close to 0%, like 10%, 5%, something like that. Alberto almost never uses his car. But they go after the verb be. They go after the verb be. Raquel is hardly ever ready on time. As you can see, the adverb of frequency is after the verb be. Raquel is hardly ever ready on time. I'm never going to give you up. After the verb be, in this case, is the am representing am. I'm never going to give you up. This is the adverb never. So let's continue. Ever means at any time. It's used mostly in questions to ask if any event happens, and these questions are usually answered with adverbs of frequency. So when you ask the question, do you ever visit the moon? Is, do you at any time visit the moon? Do you ever at some time, at any time, visit the moon? No, I never do, of course. I think it's the same for you, as unless you're an astronaut, and I don't know. Does she ever do the homework? Does she at any time, at any moment, do the homework? Sometimes she does it. So as you can see, we respond with adverbs of frequency. Usually on sometimes can begin a sentence. So in some situations, or whenever you want, you can you can put usually and sometimes at the beginning of a sentence. So usually I walk to work. You can use it after, before the verb or at the beginning of the sentence. It's the same thing. Sometimes I exercise in the morning. You can use it here or you can use it here. Whatever you want to do. Here or here is, excuse me. Uh, excuse me, guys. You can use it here. You can use it here or here. It's your choice. It's the same thing. But this is only with usually and sometimes. Okay? If we, what about, and you ask me, what about with the verb be? For example, sometimes I am very angry at the government. For example, sometimes I am very angry at the government. Angry is the verb, the main verb, and I is the subject. Well, what does the rule says? They go after the verb be. So you can use sometimes at the beginning of the sentence or after the verb be. In this case, we put it before the normal verb, but since we're using the verb be here, it goes after. It can be at the beginning or after. The beginning or after. It's your choice. Some frequency expressions usually come at the end of the sentence. For example, every day, once a week, twice a month, 3 times a year. For example, do you exercise every day? They go at the end of a sentence. Usually, I remind you, usually. I exercise 3 times a week. This goes at the end. I exercise 3 times a week. This goes as the complement. You don't exercise very often or very much. Very often or very much is the same thing. It has the same meaning. And you ask me, oh, but often is a adverb of frequency. Yes, but it can also be an expression, a time expression, but with very often or very much. This goes at the end of a sentence as a complement or part of the complement. The frequency expressions, these are expressions that can be modified depending on what you want to describe. For example, it can be once a week, 2 times a week, 3 times a year, once in a decade. So you can modify the number once a week, twice a week, 2 times a week, 3 times a week, or you can be 3 times a year, once in a decade, 2 times in a decade, 3 times in a decade. It can be modified. So these are not fixed. These are made depending on what you want to express. The comment comes twice a decade. Comment comes 2 times in a decade. A pandemic appears once in a century. A pandemic appears once in a century. Oh, a century means in 100 years. 100 years is the same as 1 century. So you can modify this. You can modify this to say 3 times in a century. It's your decision. It's what you want to express. I go to church every Sunday. You can say every Sunday. You can say every day. Or you can say twice in a Sunday. Or you can say 3 times in a Sunday. It depends on what you want to express. He goes to that restaurant 10 times a month. I don't visit my aunt very often or very much. Again, it's the same thing. So this is the end of the video. I will see you on the next one.